Hello, this is C.L. Barber, and today we're looking at crime and punishment, with a focus on how and why did heresy and treason change between 1500 to 1700. Hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll be able to understand why the authorities started to be more concerned with heresy and treason after 1500. In this period between 1500 and 1700, people's attitudes towards many crimes were similar to those held in the Middle Ages, thus showing some continuity. However, during this time, starting with Henry VIII, who broke with the Church to gain his annulment from Catherine of Aragon, the changing religious situation in England led to many religious beliefs and activities being newly classed as crimes. This was a huge change for England, and led to many more people being found guilty of crimes against authority. During the 1500s, so the 16th century, there was great instability and religious conflict in Europe as well as in England. A key turning point came in 1517 when Martin Luther, who was a German priest, protested against what he considered to be corruption within the Catholic Church. Luther's followers, like others who wanted church reform at the time, became known as Protestants, coming from the word protest. As more people listened and thought that the church needed reform, Protestantism grew. This gained such momentum that it had quite an impact on many countries throughout Europe, including England. This movement became known as the Reformation. This had an impact in England, for there were some monarchs who were Protestants and some who were Catholic. This caused problem as, like other countries, in England subjects of the king or queen were required to follow the same religion as their monarch. This had a detrimental effect in England, for this changed a lot. It started with Henry VIII, who broke with the church so that he could gain his annulment from Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. This angered many Catholics as the Pope was now no longer in control. Then Edward VI became more Protestant, which left many Catholics angry and open to being accused of heresy. When he died, Mary I was a staunch Catholic, which now meant that it was Protestants who faced the charge of heresy, leading to their deaths and her gaining the title of Bloody Mary. Then, upon her death, there was Queen Elizabeth, who once more made England Protestant, though she was much more tolerant than Mary. The impact of this was that a change of ruler could make everyday activities of Protestants and Catholics into criminal acts, depending on who the monarch was. These changes to religion showed how powerful the monarch was in deciding what counted as criminal activity. It also clearly shows how the definition of crime could change rapidly, depending on the views of the monarch at the time. One of the two most serious crimes connected to the religious changes was heresy. Heresy was seen as a crime against the Church and an offence to God. Heretics, people who committed heresy, were seen as a danger to others, as they could persuade others to follow them in their false beliefs. This meant that they were often dealt with really harshly. The crime of heresy was punishable by being burned at the stake. The person being executed was tied to a wooden post or a stake, and then a fire was lit beneath them. Death was caused by the person breathing in the fumes from the fire, or by the shock to the body, which was caused by the burns. The second crime that was also connected to religious change was the crime of treason. Treason was when a person or a group of people was seen as posing a challenge or a threat to the ruler. This was often punished by the person being hanged, drawn and quartered. When Henry VIII made himself the supreme head of the Church of England, treason became connected to heresy. This was because, except for Mary I, all monarchs during this period were now not only the secular head of the country, but also the religious head as well. As a direct consequence, anyone who challenged the ruler's authority as head of the Church of England would be guilty of treason as well as heresy. After the Pope continuously refused to grant Henry VIII an annulment from Catherine of Aragon, in 1534 Henry VIII broke away from the Church of Rome and made himself supreme head of the Church of England. However, despite this change in leadership, Not much actually changed regarding church services, and Henry remains Catholic in ethos throughout the rest of his life. However, in order to prevent potential opposition to his changes and to gain more money, Henry VIII, along with Thomas Cromwell, did dissolve the smaller and then the larger monasteries, seizing their wealth and land. This was a contributing factor to the Pilgrimage of Grace which took place. The impact of these changes were that both Protestants and Catholics were now punished as criminals during Henry's reign. Those Protestants who shared the same ideas as Luther were executed for heresy. Meanwhile, strict Catholics who refused to take the oath of supremacy, which acknowledged Henry as the head of the Church of England, were executed for treason. This included Thomas More, a humanist and once close friend and advisor of Henry VIII. In all, during Henry's reign, 81 people were executed for the crime of heresy. Edward VI, the only surviving legitimate son of Henry VIII, ruled only a short time, from 1547 until 1553, as he died at a young age. Edward had been brought up as a Protestant, and so, when he became king, he made the change of introducing a prayer book which was written in English. Previously, this had been in Latin, so only really the clergy and well-educated had understood it. This change meant that the whole population could now understand it. He also allowed priests to marry and made the interior of churches plainer, as many had complained about the wealth of the church. All of these actions were typical of Protestantism. As a consequence of these changes, some Catholic bishops who didn't agree with the reforms were imprisoned in the Tower of London. However, only 2 people during his reign were executed for the crime of heresy, which was much better than his father's reign. Like her brother Edward, due to ill health, Mary only ruled for a short period of time, from 1553 until 1558. However, unlike her brother, Mary was a devout Catholic, being the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, whom Henry had annulled his marriage to for the failure of the union to give him a son. It had been this which had led to his break with Rome. Mary, like her husband, the Spanish king, Philip II, was a strict Catholic, so on the death of King Edward, she tried to make the change of restoring the Catholic Church in England, making the Pope once more head of the English Church. This had a massive impact, and unlike the small number of deaths caused by religious change under Edward VI, 283 people were executed as heretics during the reign of Mary for refusing to follow the Catholic faith. Alongside this, over 800 Protestant clergy were forced to flee abroad. At this time, the very Catholic Philip II was leading a Spanish Inquisition which punished Protestants using torture. Like her half-brother, Elizabeth I was a Protestant. Her mother had been Anne Boleyn, whom Henry had married after breaking from the Church of Rome. Despite being a Protestant, Elizabeth could see the impact of religious turmoil on England, and so tried to find a middle way with religion. Her aim was to create a Protestant church which was not too challenging to Catholic traditions. Her hope was that this would mean that English Catholics would feel comfortable as part of the Church of England, with her at the head. Having come to the throne in 1558, the following year Elizabeth passed new laws on religion. The first was the Act of Uniformity, which stated that everyone would have to go to church on Sundays and holy days, or they would have to pay a fine. If someone refused to go to church, they would be called a recusant. However, initially, they were only prosecuted if they failed to attend church regularly, rather than on the first or second occasion. She also reintroduced the Act of Supremacy after Mary had tried to return England to the control of the Pope. This stated that the people would have to swear the Act of Supremacy, accepting her as the head of the Church of England, and that anyone who refused to swear it was committing a crime. She also repealed the harsh heresy laws which had been introduced by Queen Mary. 10 years later, in 1569, there was a Catholic rebellion against Elizabeth in the north of England, and in 1570, the following year, the Pope excommunicated Queen Elizabeth. After this year, many more Catholics were prosecuted for recusancy, and hundreds of rebels were executed for treason. This was due to Catholic plots to overthrow Elizabeth and replace her with a Catholic monarch such as her cousin Mary Queen of Scots. However, despite this, only 5 were executed for the crime of heresy during her reign, which lasted from 1558 to 1603. Lastly, there was James I. I won't go into too much detail about James and religion, as this will be looked at under the Gunpowder Plot. However, James I was the son of the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots, although he was actually brought up a Protestant. Like Elizabeth, he was tolerant towards Catholics when he came to the throne. However, as a result of the 1605 Gunpowder Plot, when it was discovered that 13 Catholics had planned to blow up the Houses of Parliament with the King in it, Catholics began to be treated much more harshly. As a direct result, James introduced many strict anti-Catholic laws, one of which was that the 1605 Popish Recusants Act forced Catholics to swear loyalty to the King and to pay heavy fines for not attending church. They also now couldn't have top positions and jobs at courts. So when you're looking at revision for this section, you need to think about these aspects. Firstly, why did religion change? And in this you need to include the role of the monarch. How did it change? What did the monarch introduce to change the religion? Were they Catholic or Protestant? And how harshly were the heretics treated as a result? What was the impact on the population? The oaths that they were made to swear, the change of the head of church, the number of executions, and the impact of the change in definition of heresy and treason, because with the unification of the role of the head of state and the head of the church by Henry VIII, these became merged into one. This is C.L. Barber, 1977. Thank you for watching and for listening.